Hi everyone, my name's Jane Dawson and I'd love to tell you about a really strange, bizarre but yet life transforming experience that I had during the birth of my son 18 years ago. My son is my youngest child and I was going through an extremely difficult labour, being a slightly more mature mom at that stage. And I was just about to give up. I felt as if I honestly I could not go on any longer, and I could feel as if my soul or my spirit was actually separating from my body. And it was so weird. It was like my body was doing its own thing, but without me consciously assisting my body, but with me sort of being separate. And as this happened, the most amazing thing of my whole life to date happened. As if it's not amazing enough to be given birth to a beautiful child, another human being, my father, who had only passed to the other realms 3 months previously, turned up at his birth. Yes, you heard. My father, who was physically dead, turned up at my son's birth, just before the birth. And here's the thing, I've told this story to many people all over the world, because this story, this event totally changed my life. It changed everything about my life, and it opened many spiritual functions for me that I previously had not been aware of. Many people have asked me, did you see your dad when he turned up, or did you hear him? No, neither of those things. But if my dad had been sat in front of me physically, this is how much I would have recognised his energy. But when his energy came and met mine in that moment where I felt as if my soul was leaving my body, it could have been a near-death experience, but I prefer to call it a near-birth experience. During that precise moment, I felt the energy I knew and recognised 1,000,000% as my father's, just gently joining mine in support, in love, and to tell me that everything was all right. And you know, when my father was on his deathbed, I made requests to him which I thought he could not hear. But when my father's energy and my energy met, I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that a form of life, a form of existence goes on, continues after physical death. Because I had witnessed my father's dying moments, I had seen my father's dead body, but here he was. That energy I knew so much as my daddy. It makes me still emotional thinking about it now, 18 years later. It was such a special experience. And the thing is, when you know this information, when you know this is a fact, that there is something after this life, there's also something before this life and a spiritual connection during this life. But to know that when your soul energy, your inner self, if you want to call it that, will go back to the non-physical realms and be lovingly reunited with all those you loved and knew on planet Earth, and maybe a lot of beings that you didn't know this time around on planet Earth, but who are still very loving and supportive of you. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that just magical? Doesn't it change everything? It does for me anyway. And since then, as I said, all my spiritual faculties have been opened up, and I'm able to converse with the universe on your behalf, on my own behalf too. And again, I look forward to telling you, who does the universe comprise of? Well, let's talk about that in another video, because that will blow your mind. But once I started learning more about this whole area of being able to be in touch with my inner self and the inner selves of those who are still on planet Earth, those who have departed, knowing what, if you like, the soul plan, the purpose was or is of those who are still here, knowing what their amazing special faculties are, their special gifts, and being able to tell the blocks that are holding them back from fully enjoying this life, from being the best version of them. Once I knew that I could help people that way, I went out and started doing it very quickly, and people are so grateful. In fact, I've even written a book. This book is called Be Your Own Medium. That is me. Someone once asked me, who's that on the cover? Yes, it's me a few years ago, and this is my lovely father, Jim, who turned up at my son's birth. I have taught people how to connect with their inner selves and with their loved ones all over the world. You know, and I help people, if they don't feel confident, then I can do that connection for them and bring through wonderful, uplifting, healing messages, and that is my joy. You're welcome to find me on Facebook as well under Jane Dawson TV, and I'll be on YouTube very frequently with my videos. Anyway, back to my story, my amazing near birth / near death experience. So, when I was 6 months pregnant with my youngest child, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer for the second time. Now, the doctors told myself and my 3 siblings that it was terminal. He had already had lung cancer once, and he'd had an operation to remove 1 lung. But this time it was back in the other lung, and they said, no, he doesn't have long left. And oh, what a terrible state we're all in. I was already having difficulties with my pregnancy. I had a bad bleed at 3 months pregnant, and I thought I had lost my baby. My mum and dad were in a very, very bad way. There was so much stress around me. I was having issues with my relationship with the father of my unborn son. My 2 daughters were sort of pre-teens, and they were adjusting to having another male person in the house and this baby coming along. And added to all of that, I was doing massively long hours at work and also a professional course of study. So I had stress upon stress upon stress, and that is not a good way to live your life. But however, that's the situation I found myself in then. So when I was about 3 months pregnant and we found out about my dad, I was really concerned about him, and I didn't know what to do for the best, because I didn't believe that I had spiritual or healing or foresightful abilities then. I just did not know much, really anything about them, or that I possessed them, and in fact that we all possess them. But that is a topic for a later video. So yes, I was working with the government, and one of my colleagues studied this, what I thought was a newfangled healing modality called Reiki, which, as many of you will know, is a Japanese form of healing, spiritual healing. And so I said to this chap, look, my dad's he's terribly ill, he's terribly stressed, he's very anxious, he can't get his breath. Can you help? Can you teach me how to do Reiki? And my colleague said, yes, yeah, we can do that. He said, that's fine. The Reiki energy will not harm you or your baby. So off I went to my colleague's house one Saturday afternoon, and I learned this Reiki. And for those who have done it and who follow the Reiki discipline, you will know that what we call the attunement to Reiki that your teacher gives you is such a wonderful experience. And it was my first time of ever working with energy, you know, that sort of inner part of us. And as I was in tune by my teacher, I could feel my head spinning with the power of it all. And also I could feel this tiny embryo moving in my belly. And that was very strange. but very fantastic too. So after I'd done the first session, stage 1, part 1 of Reiki, I went home and I asked my father, is it okay, Dad, if I do some Reiki on you? Now my father knew nothing about alternative health or like any spiritual practices, nothing. He had like no interest in it. He was a Glasgow policeman, and then he was a publican, a very, very down-to-earth practical man. But he was suffering a lot and he couldn't sleep. The fluid was building up in his lungs. So he said, of course you can do it. So I stood behind him. He was sat in his chair, and at this stage of his illness, he couldn't sleep. He was very miserable with it. And as I put my hands on his shoulders, I asked for the Reiki to be sent through for him. And I just stood there for 2 or 3 minutes, sending this Reiki to him. And my dad had gone very quiet. And I said, Dad, no reply. So I looked round the side of the chair and my dad was fast asleep. So what the Reiki energy did was to send him into a beautiful, deep, peaceful sleep. In those days, I thought that healing was to do with saving the physical body. But now I know better. I know that healing can be a help in the way that it was with my father, to aid sleep, to calm the mind, or to actually help someone's passing, especially if they don't have strong beliefs about life continuing after physical death, which I know for sure that it does due to my late father's visitation. So anyway, my father was in hospital in a very, very bad way, really in the later stages of lung cancer. And I had a call from the hospital, please come along now, your father doesn't have long left to live. So of course I was devastated. So myself and my bump and my partner at the time all went to see my dad in hospital. And when we got there, my mum and some siblings were there, but when I looked at my dad's heart monitor, I could see this. A lot of just straight line with not much activity. I thought, oh God, my dad is going to die. And for those who have lost someone particular, you know, a first parent to go, it's like unbelievable that your parent can be passing from physical life. And I did not have the belief system then that I had now, so I had a huge fear around death. Anyway, my father was unconscious, and I sat down beside him and I took his hand in mine and I whispered into his ear, Dad, I'm having a boy. I want you to always look after him for me. I love you so much. And within an hour, my beautiful father had passed. And I didn't think that he had heard my plea to always look after my son. But I felt better for telling him, Dad, I'm having a boy, because back then I thought it was better not to discuss things in the future with someone that had an uncertain future. Not the way I proceed now, but then that was the best I knew. So as I say, my dad died and I had a very challenging few weeks. The funeral, my mother, who lived in the home next door to me, the house next door to me, was very, very devastated, upset, grieving. Just what you would expect from someone who'd been married for 47 years. Anyway, let me fast forward to the 10th of May, which was 3 months after my father passed, and I now find myself in the hospital in labour with my son, who, as I said earlier, is now 18. And during that labour, which lasted for days and days and days, I was exhausted. I was a more mature mom, and I had 2 kids already, and I had been through such a lot emotionally and physically before this labour during my pregnancy that, to be honest, I was not in prime condition. I had refused drugs, and the anaesthetist come to give me a spinal block, and I told him to go away because the baby was just coming. An hour later the baby hadn't come, but I was really in a lot of pain. Remember, no drugs. So at that point I started to feel as if my mind, my soul was separating from my physical body. I felt as if I was just sort of apart from what my body was doing, this birth process which didn't seem to be progressing. And I actually started to wonder, have I had enough of human life? Am I going back to the other realms, the spirit realms now? Am I going to physically die during this birth? And just as I felt my energy, my soul float away, my father's energy just came in, and I can't even say blended with me, because that is not how I could describe it. I was just aware of my father's energy. I hadn't been thinking about him, nothing like that. It was the last thing in my mind. And I said to my partner, the midwife, "Oh my God, my dad's here." And they're like to me, "Where? Where?" I said, "Here, everywhere, he's everywhere." And you know, if he had been sitting physically in front of me, this would have been the recognition. But the recognition of his energy without seeing it, without hearing it, but just recognising and knowing it was, whoa, endless. I know 1,000,000% that my father was there with me at that very time. And just shortly after that, my son was successfully born, and here I am. Obviously did not pass to the other realms. I'm still here on planet Earth in Scotland at this precise moment. And obviously part of the purpose of that meeting of my father and I's souls was because from my father's vantage point in the other realms, he knew I had options to me other than being a bored and unwell government worker. He knew that I had a path where I could heal and uplift and assist other people on their earthly journeys. And that wasn't the only thing my father knew. When I got over the birth, and when I got home, amazing stuff started happening around the house, stuff that you wouldn't believe. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that in another video. It's called physical mediumship, when spirit beings can cause physical items to relocate, to disappear and then reappear. I have some amazing stories about what my father has showed me, and trust me, my father knew he had to go all out to convince me that life was eternal, because I am a practical person. I'm an entrepreneur and a businesswoman, as well as being a medium, being able to converse with the universe. So my dad knew he had to convince me beyond belief. So amazing stuff was happening to me and my family members in the house that no physical explanation could be found for. But during that time, I was watching the TV medium John Edward, and he was the only medium who was allowed on TV at that time. If you think back to 18 years ago, there was not really talk about angels, there was not really talk about mediums. That stuff was still very much under the counter, if you like. So John Edward was certainly a way show, especially for me. And I used to be feeding my baby and for hours on end and watching John Edwards. And when John Edward used to say something, it would happen to me. It was really incredible. Anyway, during this time, I realised that my father must have heard my dying wish to him as he lay in his deathbed unconscious. If you remember, I told him I was having a boy and I always wanted him to look after my son. And when did my father choose to make his initial appearance? That's right, immediately prior to the delivery of my son. And as I thought about it, I thought, wow, what an amazing way for my lovely dad to let me know that he heard what I requested, even though his consciousness didn't seem to be in his body. His consciousness heard my final request to him, and there he was, carrying out my final request and reassuring me that he had heard it and they're always well. And not only that, when that happened, when he showed up to me, he knew that would go a long way, a massive way, to convincing me that life is indeed eternal. Existence never ends. Our bodies may die, but our soul, our spirit energy, the source energy which is us, is eternal. And not only that, every single thing that we have said, done, lived, experienced in this life is with us in the other realms as the package, which was my father's human being, blended spirit to spirit with me. In subsequent years, I've also realised that part of my father's energy was reborn into my son, and that's hugely interesting for me to think and to think about that and to consider it, because my father was an entrepreneur, his father was an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, and my son is definitely an entrepreneur as well, as are my two daughters. So my father is now focusing his energy through my son's eyes, through my son's life. And incredibly, my son has the very same eyes as my father, and just reminds me of him so much. So that is really a really incredible, true story. You know, true life is so much stranger and more fantastic than fiction. And I can't wait to tell you the rest of my story, how I went from this bored, frustrated, sick, and getting sicker government worker onto my correct path of working with the spirit and assisting everyone that's on planet Earth. So I look forward to telling you more about that in the next video. Until then, have a fantastic day. I love you lots. Bye for now.